Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here again with our guest host, Vanessa Colalillo, and we thought we'd have a discussion on boundaries, perfectionism, and burnout. So how are you doing today, Vanessa?
Good. And yourself?
Fantastic as always. So boundaries, perfectionism, burnout, I think very relevant in this day and age, and probably every day and age, but specifically now with a lot of folks in the COVID lockdown, work from home situation, the lines between work and home are very blurred. And oftentimes it has led a lot of folks, I know I've had a lot of discussions with folks on things like boundaries and burnout, things like that. And usually perfectionism is somewhere in there. So maybe we focus a little bit on boundaries first. So what would you say they are if we were to talk a little about, in your experience, what have they been? I mean, the dictionary definition is a line that marks the limits of an area, right? And professional and professional situations, it's kind of like work requests outside of work hours, that sort of thing, outside the typical 9 to 5, working weekends and stuff like that. Those are what I typically hear as kind of boundaries or overstepping boundaries. What would you say from your experience?
Yeah, that's definitely accurate in terms of wanting to understand the definition. I think all I'd really add to that from my experience around what they are is also communication and expectation. So when I think of boundaries, I think of communicating expectations, not only with others, but for myself, right? What do I expect to accomplish by today? And what's top priority? I heard really great advice in the past as well around, if everything's considered a fire, or if you're always saying I'm crazy busy, maybe you're not looking at what you actually should be busy with that day, right? Where do you draw the line, when you're looking at a list of priorities? And if everything's what you want to accomplish, if everything's top priority, what are you actually making an impact on? So to me, it's setting those priorities, setting those expectations so that you could be productive and actually make an impact on, what doesn't cross that line, what you don't want to cross that line.
For sure. The quote, if everything is important, then nothing is, right?
Yeah.
That sort of thing, because they're all on the same playing field. But we know that boundaries are important, or maybe they are, maybe they're not. And a part of it is well, I don't want to seem like a pushover, right? Because like I'm constantly getting work, people are coming to me to do this, and then this is important, and this is important, and this is important, and then we get stuck into that. And one of the concepts that I often chat with folks are things like boundary violations, right? So if someone asks you to stay a little bit later or work weekends or this and that, right? And I mean, with enough of those violations, that obviously eventually leads to burnout, which is not a good thing in that sense. But in my experience, like it's really only a violation if you communicate it, right? Because sometimes you say, oh, are you okay to work tonight? And if you say okay, well, that's not really a boundary violation because you said okay, right?
Yeah.
Versus saying, well, actually, could I make up for it tomorrow or do something else because I have an important event? And then you kind of set the boundaries. And if they still insist and say, no, we really need you, okay, that could be considered a boundary violation. But without the communication, I think you touched on it a bit, that I think is important. But what are some of your thoughts in terms of like the importance of it, how you communicate it, and maybe if you can share like an experience or two in your life where that's happened, and probably not naming too many names, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I have many, but you're absolutely right. Like I think if what really is the issue there is violating your own boundaries, right? If you're not communicating it, it isn't really on the company or the other people, but maybe you're violating your own boundaries or haven't set them properly yourself. So taking that, accountability, that ownership over really measuring your desk properly, measuring your calendar properly. But I think, if I had to talk to you a bit about the importance, I don't perceive it too much as, I'm a pushover, but I think that's sometimes a perception. I typically came from a place where I did always want to say yes. I did want to always help people, and if it feels nice, but there's a reverse impact, I think, when on your own productivity, and you're, defeating your potential when you say yes to everything, right? When you don't draw that line. So that's what I've, learned over many years. I think early in my career, that was the phase I was in. I wanted to be on every project I can. I wanted to, always say yes. And I easily learned that, I think in order for me to succeed a lot more, I have to start being comfortable to say, no, not at this time, or, hey, can we talk about what projects should take priority? Because I, really can't say yes to all of them. Stuff like that. And I think, to not go into experiences just yet, but around the importance, I think, as I was saying, like violating boundaries can really have a negative impact on work results, on your life, on your health, not only stress, but, eventually burnout. And I think if we're remembering that and trying to be a little self-aware, that's what motivates me to try to maintain that, that work-life balance. Try to remember, how is my mental state, so that I could have an energized day tomorrow, right? So that I could give my fullest potential to a company or to my career. And I think that's why they're so important, right? Just making sure you're going to make the greatest impact you can by being energized, by staying positive and not burning yourself out.
For sure. I mean, a couple of things that came to mind is I know a lot of folks who take the title of kind of people pleaser, saying yes to everything. Say, of course I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. But that becomes, very subtle boundary violations, which kind of extend the boundary. And it's not really violated because you're keep on saying yes, but eventually that's what leads to burnout. And the other thing that kind of came to mind is kind of that FOMO factor, where the fear of missing out, where you said, yeah, sure, I want to do it. And you do it from a place of like positive intent, because I'd love to try that. I'd love to be involved. I'd love to be on that. But meanwhile, you have like 18 things on your plate. And then when does it all get done? Well, because you committed to all of them and you want to get it all done, then, well, because you didn't set any of those boundaries for yourself primarily, and then all those things become a bit of a challenge, right? So
yeah. And I love that you mentioned FOMO. I actually was just thinking about that, whether it's work or life, that, years ago, that's really how I was. I think I did have a fear of missing out on certain things, and wanting to see, maybe there's multiple plans, let's say in a weekend, wanting to see so many people, but eventually that could be draining, right? Maybe you don't have time to attend everything you were invited to, or maybe you're sacrificing, not seeing certain family members because maybe you're with friends too much. Like there's so much, I think, reverse impact, like we were saying, if we have that FOMO mentality. So it's so important to kind of take a step back, and view your priorities, view what you want to accomplish, just week by week, really.
For sure. And would you be able to share a few experiences and just kind of give a story or two about kind of boundaries and violations, or maybe the stuff I wish I knew earlier about how you might, if you retroactively went back, might have resolved or done things a little bit differently in those regards?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the saying yes one is definitely a good one. That's what I wish I knew earlier, but I think it at least got me to where I am. So it's, it's sometimes okay to go through those experiences. I think at least now I do know from then that it's productive, and it's okay to say no, or to pause on certain projects and prioritize effectively. So that's one. The FOMO, around life versus, events and work, and trying to be at many places at once is definitely an example I experienced. But one, more in detail, I'd say right now is the hybrid workplace life, right? Like you were mentioning, the work from home. And that's really what I'm experiencing right now, where I really have to set those boundaries. I actually have an app called Google Calendar integration called Clockwise that's been really, really helpful. And it helps automate your calendar a bit. So it forces you to have focus hours. It reschedules meetings if you don't have as many focus hours or lunch available on your calendar. It benefits not you, but even people you're meeting with, if an automated reschedule has to happen. it locks in your lunch hour daily. It really kind of reminds you to breathe, to have time outside of meetings. And I'm experiencing right now, especially as our company SoundHound really scales and is in growth mode, I'm experiencing a lot of meeting heavy days. And by the end of the day, it's like, okay, have I done any work? Do I work all night? Because I've been in meetings all day. So I'm really trying to set those boundaries, making sure I have 1 to 2 hours a day blocked, consistent hours back to back, blocked for focus time for work, with my head down, not in meetings. I'm making sure that lunch hour is, visible on my calendar for myself to be reminded to eat. Because at home, I think that's where that line gets really blurry. And I don't know if I've definitely have a lot of boundaries experience. I don't know if because it's definitely really real. I don't know if I've hit burnout, but I've been really close, I think, and self-aware to pause when experiencing some of the symptoms. And I think that happens a lot when working from home. If my husband's home, for example, I'm reminded maybe to eat lunch together. But if it's just me, I'm like, working through my lunch hour. And then maybe by 3 p.m., I'm feeling extremely drained. I'm not, without food or energy, I'm not as motivated. Maybe there's too many meetings that day. So at home, I find it harder, right, to commit to that boundary that you want to set for yourself, where in the office, maybe there's a team lunch that's really forcing you to get up and have a break. Another thing with, the hybrid workplace choice that I'm in right now is even just setting boundaries, drawing a line on your schedule, on your decisions. I'm trying, and seeing it work well, is to make decisions intentionally. In the past, I thought, working from home versus in office was just a preference, right? Maybe one day I'll go in, one day I won't. We were happy about that flexibility. Where now, when I'm just experiencing as an adult and my role's evolving in my career, I'm realizing, I have to be strategic and intentional with how my day looks, right? If I'm going to commute and go in the office and then be in meetings all day, is that productive, right? Is that 1 to 2 hour commute actually taking work time away from my desk? Or should I, go in the office on a day where there's a team lunch, where there's less meetings, so I can actually see some people and get some work done? So trying to make, those decisions more intentionally is definitely what I'm experiencing, and that lunch hour boundary at home.
For sure. I think that being purposeful and having that intentionality is definitely important. I'm glad that they have some tools that'll help you to kind of automate some of that, because sometimes when you're in the moment and stress and you have all these things going on, you don't allocate that hour for lunch or the time to relax, a little break in the afternoon, that sort of thing, so that you can continue to go. And what came to mind is maybe other areas where folks could set boundaries as well, because we talked a lot about kind of the hybrid environment. There's a lot of it is that those time boundaries where, okay, after hours, working or not, or weekends and things like that. And as a bit of a side, so I typically dress up. People see me in a shirt and tie, and like, well, you're working from home, why are you doing that? It's like, well, this is part of my boundary, because when this is on, I'm working. When it's off, I'm not, right? And it's really helped me almost provide that kind of psychological kind of cue to say, okay, work, and then off, no work. Is that sort of thing. Now, once in a while, I kind of sneak out and still work while I'm not in a suit and tie, but a shirt and tie, but it is less likely to happen. But some other areas are more like scope, right? And what I mean by that is sometimes people are hired for a particular role and they're asked, hey, could you do this as well, right? That's not exactly what they're supposed to be doing, but could you do it as well? And for some people, it's like, sure, and then sure, and then sure, sure, and then they end up doing stuff they're really not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Now, in a startup, that's kind of part of the game, right? You have to contribute. But in some larger organizations, it might be, well, if I'm supposed to be doing this other stuff that's not part of my core job description, when do I actually get to do my core job, right? So things like that. And then you also mentioned a little bit on things like friends and family, where like it's not just at work, but like your family wants your time, your friends want your time, any other interest groups or social things need your time too, right? So it's also understanding how to set boundaries along there, where you need your own time as well as time for work and time for friends and family and things like that. Are there any other areas of kind of boundaries that you would kind of suggest folks to think about drawing lines?
Yeah, you mentioned some great things. I mean, I love the example of like your dress code, your attire. I think, you know, people have different, like there's no rules around how to effectively avoid burnout or how to draw boundaries. I think we're all very different. So it's kind of finding what works for you and trying to be aware of, you know, what you feel. And for me, I have a similar example, you know, sometimes I often like to stay in the kitchen while I'm working on, you know, on a kitchen island, or I have my tea or coffee nearby, you know, a snack if I need to, but it gets very blurry, right? That's my living space. It's not my workspace. And so I then, you know, go into my office, go into my desk, and I feel that sense of, like you said, when I'm here, I'm working. When I'm out of here, I could at least, you know, get away from the laptop, and that's where the line's drawn. So I love your dress code attire, and I think there's so many different, you know, different approaches people can take. You mentioned a great thing around startups, right? And just taking on more and more work that maybe isn't really part of your primary deliverable. I definitely have a recent and you know, good example that I guess is a general tip as well for others, is around measuring your success. So I got to the place where I'm a recruiter, right? So primary deliverable is to produce hires for the company, right? Help job seekers find a great place to work at SoundHound. But there's also projects, right? And sometimes you can take on too many projects. So what I experienced recently is, you know, growing a list of more metrics and data and complexity around how you measure your success, how you measure your goals. And I think that's something that's really helped me recently. Like I reached a point of confusion where my results versus my goals versus, you know, what's a priority was really coming to my mind. And I wanted to make sure I was making an impact on the right things, right? Reaching my goals before it becomes discouraging and confusing. And I think that's what's key is having data in front of you, right? Having, if you're not sure, you know, opening up to your leaders, to your peers around, you know, what are the business goals? What are, you know, our top priorities? What projects should I maybe put on pause because I can't focus on them all, you know, really impactful plus deliverables. So I think that's what's really helped me, taking the approach of really opening up to your leader, you know, having that communication that I think some people maybe hesitate around, to say, you know, I'm struggling these past few weeks, or things are really confusing. I want to look at a bit more data or metrics around what my goals should be, how my performance is. I think it's so important we measure ourselves, not just for the company, but to measure your own success, right? Or else it could get very confusing. Like, you know, am I performing well? Am I feeling rewarded? I think data is really the answer to a lot of that, so that you can continue to improve, continue to measure, know what to work on, and that open communication.
For sure. And it goes to the quote, I think it's something to the effect of what isn't measured can't be managed, or something like that. And obviously you want to manage these boundaries so that you don't go into burnout. And maybe we'll switch over to burnout, where, I mean, that often happens when a lot of these violations happen. And sometimes it's a huge boundary violation or a series of like death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. But probably want to get into some kind of warning signs if you're at the cusp or about to feel that. So the example that came from my life is I was a management consultant in my past life, and we would have to go to clients and do workshops and things like that. And they asked me to do this one for a new technology that no one in our department had ever used. So I was like, sure, why not? And what I would do is, on the plane over to the client, I would read all the manuals and get up to speed on that, create a workshop deck, and then I would perform the workshop. And then they had questions, and I'd say, let me get back to you. And then at the hotel room, I would figure out what the answers to the questions were, and then create the next workshop for the next one. And I would be doing that for weeks on end, where it was, well, not exactly a 24-hour day. And I actually prided myself that I could get by on like 4 hours, 2 hours, 0 hours of sleep. Definitely not advisable for anyone. And then what happened is after a couple of weeks, like I was lucky to have a senior manager that was really interested in my health, because he said, Luki, you don't look good. And he literally said, you don't look good. And it's like, seriously, I've been watching you for the past couple of days. I want you to go right now, go back to the hotel and get some sleep. And
That's a
he had
commander.
the foresight. Yeah, so that was a great, and that was a kind of a eye-opening moment. And I kind of slept it off. The next day I felt really good, and I was able to keep going. And we had a conversation on like, okay, what can we do, and how do we manage this and all that sort of stuff. Because a lot of it was, again, me not setting the proper boundaries, and part of the FOMO and people pleaser and wanting to do all those sort of things. So all with good intentions, but not necessarily getting the great results. So obviously some of the early warning signs are some things like exhaustion, sleep problems, and maybe you're not enthusiastic about what you're doing. Your performance is going down. There's probably mental, sometimes even physical stress, where you might get headaches and stomach problems, or you just want out of there, that sort of thing. And hopefully you're not turning into things like food or drugs or alcohol to kind of overcompensate. But those are some of the things that folks want to look out for. And you mentioned that you never really got into burnout, but you're probably close a few times. Are there a few that you can kind of highlight or say like, well, here's a couple more warning signs, or are there things to think about?
Yeah, I think it's those, I use the word discouragement. And I think that's one of the biggest ones. I felt a sense of, I'm usually a very passionate, excited, driven person with my work. And I think there was a time a few weeks ago, really. So we're all still, we're always learning. I don't think it's something that could totally disappear. What I think is, like you said, with your experience, just being aware of that and then pausing, re-energizing, and hopefully getting right back to it. But a few weeks ago, experiencing that like discouragement, really, like a lot of lack of motivation, almost like an irritation. So I think that's, a huge symptom as well, in terms of like the way I felt mentally inspired. It was just super different one week, but the next, after that, re-energizing, after looking at a bit more data to better measure my performance, talking about change with my role and future career, the path we're headed on, really looking into the future instead of the current feelings you're having, helped bring back that energy, bring back the motivation. But I think like you said, I overworked myself. I was in a lot of meetings. There is such thing, as meeting fatigue. I'm experiencing that, and it's draining, right, on the mind. And by the end of the day, if there's too many meetings, I think that's what I experienced, just not getting enough work time for a few weeks. When you could do something, but maybe just haven't got to it is not a good feeling. And that was my experience, a bit of that exhaustion, discouragement, the desire and intention to want to do more, but just not getting to it, right? Not getting the time in. So that was a bit of my symptoms in a way. And then just we've made, even on my team, just made a huge difference on talking about priorities, using this clockwise little integration I have, canceling meetings, pausing some projects. This is like real industry discussions that happen for, I'm sure, a lot of companies. And sometimes they change month to month, week to week, just talking about, what you should be focusing your time on. And that's really helped just totally change my mindset as well, and motivation.
For sure. And what I took from that is that recharge time over the weekend is very important. Make sure that at least 1 or 2 days. I know, especially folks in the startup world, the entrepreneurial, like work's often on your mind and you can't really disconnect. But really, if you can, at least an hour, a day, the whole weekend, if you can. I'm reminded of someone who we were talking about how like work is a marathon, and he kind of said, no, it's not a marathon. It's actually a series of 52 sprints, right? Because ideally you should go hard Monday to Friday, but you need to rest and relax, and then go hard again, and then rest and relax, right? So a different perspective. I want to have a.
You mentioned, I was going to say, you mentioned like recharge days, I think, and it's often as humans, or if you like yourself, you were saying, if you really want to accomplish something, you can just work through the night and it'll be it'll be worth it. I think we have to remember, we are human, and that won't lead to the best results. And recharge day is something we're experiencing actually at Soundhound, and I feel, super fortunate for that. On Fridays, we have little to no meeting day Fridays, early end around 3 p.m. So really just giving back that time that, even if it's not possible always, or you're not making it happen, it's that reminder that, recharging and re-energizing is important, and, a company's valuing that. I think that's super critical nowadays.
For sure. I think a lot of companies are understanding the value of making sure that their people are well taken care of and engaged, and have that time to actually work and unwind and disconnect. And it seems like that even the government is getting in on that, because I think we want to chat a little bit about some of the new legislation. So for those of you in Ontario, in Canada, there's something called the right to disconnect. And I'd love you kind of share a little bit of your thoughts on that, and maybe give folks a little bit of insights in terms of like rights and things like that they have as a result of that.
Yeah, so it's a very new legislation. It went into effect on June 2nd. So just over a week now, specific to Ontario. Ontario's the first to roll this out, from my knowledge. Like we were discussing earlier, Luki, not many people are aware or discussing it yet. I've heard a little bit about it on the radio. My company has, released it to our Canadian office. I think right now it's important to make awareness about this. What it is really is the right to not engage in work-related communications, including, any emails, any calls, video calls, sending instant messages, being free from performing outside of work hours, after your work hours. So it kind of goes back to what you were discussing, you do have to communicate those work hours is what that means, right? You do have to maybe on your calendar outline your typical day, or, hear from the company, what is our typical day? I think, I am still very much in a place where I enjoy the flexibility, right? If, some days I want to work 7 a.m., maybe end around 4. If some days I want to start at 9 a.m. I enjoy that, flexibility, but that in those cases, I think it's a little bit more difficult to draw a line, right? That's where it could become a bit blurry. So this is really allowing us, this law, to have that reminder that, once you shut down, you don't need to respond. And having leaders remind you about that could be helpful, right? Or if it's not aware, sharing this right with others could be helpful right now. And there's some examples too I can mention on, disconnecting. I think if, let's say you haven't communicated those hours, it might get difficult to feel like you still have that right. It does need to be communicated and known. So, turning on out of office notifications when you're not working, pausing those notifications, maybe even like setting expectations around your response times, right? Knowing if you're logging out typically around 4, set the expectation so people can communicate to you before 4 p.m. I think that, that's a really big piece of it. Limiting those virtual meetings, and those, a lot of people are using, workplace chats like Slack or instant message platforms. And I guess, it's very easy on your phone to be answering those all night if it's a quick message. And, sometimes I'll be very honest, that makes me feel better. If it's, a quick response at 8 p.m., I might want to acknowledge that and then move on. But then you can often, very quickly enter a bigger discussion that you didn't think you started, right? Or talk about an entire project for the next hour, just by answering that one message. So I think it's, limiting that and being aware of that. And I'm excited. I'm glad Ontario's acknowledging this, and really the first to do so. But we'll see how it works, or, the pros and cons it has on such a hybrid world as well.
For sure. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of good and bad that come out of it. Hopefully, people don't kind of take advantage of it as well, because there are always some emergencies where, like, you know what, for the good of the company, you want to do that. But if it's every single day, every single week or something, well, something's not right, and maybe something needs to be adjusted. But as we start to close off this episode, because I'm sure we could keep on going on and on, but how about a couple of tips for setting boundaries or avoiding burnout? So, I mean, the main tip is sounded like it's communication, right, between your boss and the management team and your team, your peers, and your reports. All of that would be good, so that people know work hours, not work hours, and any times where you have to really make it to the gym or pick up the kids, or you have a class or whatever, something that you need to do. I think any sort of tech that you can implement would obviously be a good one. Even minimizing kind of like notifications on devices and stuff like that, like on your phone. Take that. I think some of them have like a do not disturb mode, where certain ones don't kind of pop up in certain times. I know some people have like a work phone and a personal phone, right? But that's kind of two devices. It's really up to you. One that I found quite helpful for on the email side, and some messaging apps have this too, is to schedule the send, right? So if it's late in the day and in the evening, set it to send at 8 a.m. or early the next morning, versus right now, because at least you know it's dealt with because you answered it, but you're not subject to the person's response at during dinner at 7:01 because they decide to pick up their phone as well, right? Yeah. Are there any other sorts of tips and tricks you'd have for kind of setting boundaries in addition to and avoiding burnout in addition to what we talked about?
Yeah, you mentioned some great ones. As we close off, probably a few to add. If people, listening are Slack users, there's, and I'm sure on other platforms, there's meeting reminders, messages reminders, like you said, pre-scheduled messages. I often use that. If you can't tackle something now, make a quick automated reminder, and you're not forgetting about it, but at least you don't feel overwhelmed that there's that pending message, right? And pick when you want to focus on that. Remind me in 3 hours, remind me tomorrow. That's always great. Like you said, technology clockwise would be my recommendation right now. Would love to answer any questions people might have around that. It's been really, really valuable to myself and some team members. Another tip I'd say, or one of the last one or two, would be asking for feedback and being vulnerable sometimes, and that's not always easy in business, right? And being aware of your emotions, right? It's you definitely want to be emotionally intelligent, but you don't want to ignore your mental state. You don't want to ignore your emotions. It happens to very successful people. It happens to everyone, every human. So I think just asking for feedback, measuring your performance and your goals with data, so that you can stay happy, stay motivated, and transparent with your improvement over time. I think a lot of that leads to why we end up being in a burnout phase, or working too much, crossing that line, right? And I think just trying to build more data for yourself and measuring your success could be really helpful.
For sure. And one of the last tips that I want to kind of end off with is we talk about like doing too much. And there's actually a quote which kind of illustrates pretty well, where we don't do too much, we do too little of what lights us up, right? And I find that there are times when you're doing a ton, but you're still energized, because oftentimes you're putting the boundaries, doing self-care, going to the gym and eating properly, spending time with your friends here and there. And it might be only half an hour, 50 minutes at a time, or whatever it is, but you're doing that consistently, so that throughout the day, your energy level is not dropping, and getting to zero. It's dropping, re-energized, dropping, re-energized, dropping, re-energized. And then eventually you still have something in the tank at the end of the day. So consider why those boundaries are important. Is you want to make sure you're still energizing, do those things that you love throughout the day, and you can still manage to do a lot. So thanks so much, Vanessa, for joining us on this conversation on boundaries and burnout. Any kind of last parting words?
Oh, I was going to say, it's very true. Just get that exercise in. That's also something I've been trying to commit to. That's where the boundary, can't get ignored. Committing to 2 to 3 times a week. That's something that's been really helpful. I think, going for a walk, getting some air, eating lunch, these things are so important, and we enjoy it, and it makes you come back and do better work. So that's what I've been experiencing.
Thanks so much, Vanessa, for the conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luki. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.